Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session C1, Barn Preservation Basics. My name is Jeff Gagno. I am the Eastern Massachusetts Preservation Circuit Rider for Preservation Mass, and I'll be helping to facilitate this session. I would like to first introduce our presenters and guests all the way from New Hampshire, where there is a robust infrastructure to support the evaluation, repair, preservation, and continued use of historic barns. First of all, my colleague and friend, Beverly Thomas, joined the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance in 2005, where, among other important work, she manages the Old House and Barn program, oversees grant programs for barn assessments and community landmarks planning studies, and coordinates the biennial Old House and Barn Expo. Ian Blackman is a craftsman and barn preservation contractor who has years of experience working with barn owners to care for their historic barns. He's a graduate of the North Bennett Street School in Boston and established Ian Blackman LLC Preservation and Restoration in 2003. Ian really leads by example and brings to this conversation a wealth of hands-on practical experience with barns, and he seems to have seen it all, I think, based on what I've seen. Beverly and Ian will make a presentation that they plan to wrap up around 10:40 to leave 10 minutes or so for questions until we need to end promptly at 10:50. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your toolbar, and I will help facilitate asking those questions at the end of the session. And finally, there are links to some additional resources about barn preservation near the original link to the session, which I urge you to check out. Okay, thanks very much again for attending this session, and please take it away, Beverly and Ian, once I share my screen.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for that nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, old barns. As you had mentioned, I've been running the barn program at the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance for over 15 years. But my connection and interest to barns actually started when I was about 8 years old, when we lived in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And almost daily, I visited a neighboring Pennsylvania Dutch farm to help with farm chores. And one of my favorite places on the farm was the magnificent bank barn with the Pennsylvania Dutch forebay and the iconic cupola. I have fond memories of helping out in the barn, helping milk the cows, staying away from the bullpen with the big bull named Freddie in the bullpen. Wonderful, fond memories. Years later, I went back to the farm hopefully to see the farmers that were there, but I found a closed up barn, shut tight farm outbuildings. And when I went to the farmhouse to see if anybody was there, there was a note on the door, and this is all a true story, saying that Ruth, the last surviving sibling of this 3-generation farm, had moved to a nursing home. So I was really saddened to find that nobody was living there. There was no life left at the farm. I recently did a Google Maps search and found that the entire farmstead had been demolished. It's now gone. And there was literally a for sale sign on that property saying for sale 20-lot subdivision. So it was really tough when I saw that, because I have just amazing memories of that place. So why are we saving these old barns? Why should we? Well, we're losing these tangible links to our agricultural heritage. That particular farm family had been farming for over 100 years. They actually had 9 children. 4 of them stayed on the property and farmed. And then unfortunately, it did not get passed down and was lost. These farm properties now, that particularly that one, there's no sense of the history that had existed on that land. So unfortunately, it's going to develop into house lots. So it's really a shame when we lose that connection to the history. Barns are such an iconic part of the New England landscape. They dot our landscapes and represent a lifestyle and tradition that's quickly eroding. Other reasons for preserving the barn's economic benefit, agritourism is very much growing in New Hampshire, and I know Massachusetts as well. These barns are often the hub of farm operations for pick your own apple orchards or fruit farms, corn mazes, farm to table dinners in barns are a huge success now, and even farm stays where people actually go and stay on the farms and get to experience what it's like to do farm chores and petting zoos and things like that in these farm properties. And then finally, for reasons, sometimes just personal reasons like the ones I have, people just love barns. They think they're beautiful, or they have a personal connection to their parents or their grandparents. And they're really, it's pulling on the heartstrings when these barns are lost. And then just the fond memories. So these are all reasons why we hope others feel the same way that we do, that it's really important to save these iconic structures. Go ahead, Jeff. Next. We'll get there. There we go. Oh, all right. But our barns are facing challenges. They're big. They're expensive to maintain. And we find that if they don't have a use, they often get neglected. And then that's the beginning of the end for them. We always say that a happy barn is a barn that is being used. So even if it's only being used for storage, boat storage, car storage, whatever, barns really need a use for people to actually invest in them, want to invest in them, because they are expensive. The other thing is, I find that we are big proponents of doing barn assessments, and I'll talk about those later on in the presentation. But once a barn owner is aware of the barn's history and significance, they tend to be more interested in putting money into their barns and maintaining the barns. Also, liability and insurance issues, they can be expensive to insure. I've had many calls from barn owners saying that their insurance company just called to say that they want the barn to be demolished because they're not going to cover it anymore, or they're not going to cover it, so they want it to be demolished. And I have been able to, actually, we just had a session yesterday about insuring historic properties and agricultural buildings. And I just want to let everybody know it's very important. There are insurance companies out there that will insure barns. You just have to get the right company and have very good communication with them. If there's an issue with the barn, just communicate with them to find out what it is that they don't like about that particular barn. Is it the wiring? Is it the condition of the roof? But just have open lines of communication and sort of set a plan, and usually you can resolve the issue of insurance. I've never had an issue where someone called to say they were told to demolish and they actually followed through with it. They've always figured it out. And then the development pressures that we all know of. That's why use is so important. If the barn has a use, people are going to want to keep it, and the development pressures will be relieved a little bit. So next. And Ian, this is you.
Okay, so there's two basic type of barns we're going to see in New England, and one is the English barn, which is on the upper left there, and the Yankee barn. And Yankee barns can be either ground level barns or bank barns, and the bottom left is a bank barn. All English barns will be ground level barns unless they've been moved or they've been changed. The terrain's been changed around them. And the bottom right is a more modern barn. A gambrel barn is going to be late 1800s, and you see a lot of those more out towards, Pennsylvania and places like that. The upper right is a ground level Yankee barn that is in the restoration process, and that's an early Yankee barn. So all English barns are going to be, 1700s to early 1800s. And then after that, you're going to see mostly Yankee barns. The ground level Yankee barn in the upper right is actually a 1784. It's a very early Yankee barn. And we'll actually see more of that later on. You can give me the next slide, Jeff. So English barns, they're mostly fairly small, 30s by 40, but you can see some different sizes in English barns. Sometimes you'll see two English barns that have been put together. been moved for bigger needs of the farm. They usually have their entrance is always on the side, and it was always originally it would have been a swinging door, and a lot of them have been changed over to sliding doors. 3 bays wide. I'm working on an English barn in Alton, New Hampshire right now that happens to be 6 bays wide. It's very unusual, from 1780. And like it says there, center bay was a threshing bay. Center bay and most even Yankee barns, early Yankee barns would have been the threshing bay. Ground level, rubble field stone foundations. We can have the next one, Jeff. Yankee barns. Okay, so Yankee barns are center aisle barns. And yeah, it is the most common barn you're going to see in New England. So when they went to Yankee barns, because they could expand them easier. So this with the center aisle, and you're going to build a bigger barn, you can add more vents to the rear of the barn, and you can get a bigger operation much faster than you could with an English style barn. So you got a lot more room for fodder storage and animals in a Yankee barn. Also, you didn't have to shovel snow from the side door when it came off the roof and blocked it. And early Yankee barns, so all early barns in New England would have been made basically for fodder storage. It was mostly sheep to supply the woolen mills in Massachusetts. And it wasn't until probably the 1830s that barns started to house the dairy industry, as people moved out west and found the plains to be a better place for raising large flocks of sheep. And plus the woolen industry changed. So that's when a lot of barns were converted to dairy barns in New England. And that's one of the problems that has occurred for a lot of Yankee barns and early English barns in New England is that cows produce a lot of moisture, and they produced a lot of problems for the wood floors in those barns. And there were adaptations made to agriculture as time went forward for storing hay and what have you, where the farmer would cut out pieces of the barn to make room for hay moving equipment. I always tell a story of I worked on a Yankee barn in Concord, New Hampshire, where you could tell the farmer had bought a Super C tractor, and it had a large rear axle on it, so you could move the tires in and out depending on what crop you were working on. And he couldn't get that tractor into the center bay of the barn, so he carved out big swoops on either queen post on either side of that center bay till he could fit that tractor in there. And so he's reduced the queen post to 3 inches on either side by taking a big scoop out. So farmers actually caused a lot of problems for their barns. They were very brave in what they would cut out of them. We can take the next slide, Jeff. So here's a bank barn. Now, bank barns are always stunning. The high drive barn is another way for this one here is a high drive barn. Bank barns are a type of Yankee barn where the farmer was looking for terrain that wasn't great for growing crops. So a hillside is a great place to do that. It's a great place to easily get another level in the barn by having a basement, and for using gravity to feed the cows or what have you, and manure to go to the basement. The problem with most bank barns, which we're going to talk about in a little bit later here, is that they tend to want to migrate down the slope. And they migrate down the slope because they're built on dry stone foundations. And a lot of times there's not good drainage around those foundations. And so the freeze-thaw cycle in the wintertime, when water gets behind that stone foundation and freezes and expands, it starts pushing the foundation downslope, and the barn tends to want to migrate with it. We'll get into some solutions for that going forward. There are a lot of really bad solutions that happen with that, and we'll talk about that as well. We'll have the next one, Jeff. Okay, gambrel roof, ground level barn. So gambrel, they went to gambrel. That's later 1860s or so, and maybe a little bit earlier than that. She says 1890s present. You can find some that are sort of 1870s, 80s. But gambrel barns were stick built, and they're built when they could have had more access to sawn lumber. They gave them a bigger capacity for hay storage up in the barn. A lot of the problems with gambrel barns is that when we first started using sawn dimensional lumber, is we didn't quite understand the engineering, the stresses of how big we needed to make that sawn lumber for different size joists and rafters. So a lot of these barns have fairly undersized timbers in them. We can have the next one, Jeff. Okay, so when we go back to dating your barn, so once we said English barns were all early barns, they're going to be 1700 to early 1800s. All English barns are going to have an English tying joint, which is the joint on the left. And basically they were stood up by sidewalls were put up first. And when you go to a Yankee barn, which can have early Yankee barns, will also have that English tying joint to get the center aisle. And then when you get later into the 1860 or so, 50, 60, you're going to find these drop plate frames. And those are all going to be Yankee barns. And you can also date your barn by what's hewn as well in it. So early barn in the 1700s, an early English barn style barn is going to have all its main timbers hewn, and it's going to have its knee braces hewn as well. And that's going to take you up to about 1820. And then when you start finding main timbers, your knee braces sawn, you're getting sort of, 1840 or so. And then when you see most of your timbers sawn, then you're getting, to that sort of 1840 and 1860 period. And you can also look for your water sawn marks where the striations on the boards vary depending on the speed of the saw. Okay, Jeff. Okay, here's you, Bev. You muted?
Yep, sorry about that.
There you go.
Okay, as we had mentioned earlier, the importance of barn assessments. Can't stress enough how important it is to have a condition assessment done of your barn. The New Hampshire Preservation Alliance has a grant program, other states do. But even if there's no grant program in your state, it's well worth the value to hire a qualified contractor. And that's really important as well. Make sure they're qualified in timber frame construction if you have a timber frame building. To better understand your barn, to understand its age, key construction features, the current condition, the needs of the barn, and how you might phase a rehabilitation project. I talk to barn owners all the time that are really depressed on the poor condition of their barn. And I said, well, have you had anybody look at it? And they said, no, but it's falling down. Then we do a barn assessment and they find really it's just a few posts that need to be repaired. And it's all very manageable. So before you get completely overwhelmed about the condition of your barn, I highly recommend doing a barn condition assessment. And relating to qualified contractors, I know Preservation Massachusetts has an online directory on their website. I would definitely start there. If you can't find anybody there that works out, reach out to other barn owners. If you see a barn being worked on, I think it would be fine. Usually it's fine. People love to talk about their barns, talk to contractors, to just stop by and introduce yourself and meet the contractor. But just learning to know, growing the network of barn contractors. We in New Hampshire have a great network, and I'm sure you do in Massachusetts as well. And the barn contractors are all very willing to help folks answer questions and do these barn assessments. And I just also want to point out that Ian did do a talk on doing barn assessments, and it's posted on YouTube. And I think that link is listed also on the Preservation Massachusetts conference website. So I encourage you to check out that link. All right, take it away.
Well, we'll go back to that one just for a minute, Jeff.
All right, Ian,
okay.
Talk about that photo.
Yeah, okay. So one thing I want to point out though is barns. There's three things that really can have problems for barns, and one is the roof not being maintained, and the other is foundation issues. So when you get a contractor in there, it's not just timber frame. You want somebody who's schooled in the whole 9 yards right down to the stone foundation, because that's where a lot of issues happens, particularly with bank barns. So what I'm doing in this picture is I'm shooting a line with a laser, and I'm measuring down from a common joint in the barn, because obviously barns don't float up. I mean, gravity makes everything go down. So what that tells me is how the different posts have moved So when I go into the basement, I can look for the problems and the issues in the foundation and the posting in the basement or underneath the ground level barn. So that's sort of the starting point. And it's important to get that, what the barn evaluation or assessment will give you is a recipe book to follow and give you that knowledge when you're talking to contractors of what needs to be done. And it's really important to get that recipe book so that you get the overall picture of the barn. Because I just want to quickly say, if the barn has moved, right, and if joinery is having a problem and you're going to do some picking on that barn, if you just go and put a roof on it and your roofing guy says, hey, we're going to put plywood over that roof because we don't like those roof boards, he's going to lock in that barn into the shape it's in, because the plywood acts like a big gusset on there, or a metal roof will act like a big gusset and really resist trying to pick up that barn and get it in a better shape. And this is particularly important if your joinery has failed due to the movement. Okay, Jeff.
Here we have 3 examples of barns that we have done assessments on, that the barn owner has then done work. The top left photo is a barn that had an assessment many years ago, and the barn owner actually did the work outlined in the assessment himself over a period of, I just heard from him recently, I think it's been the last 15 years, he's been doing little bits each year. He also got it in the barn tax incentive program in New Hampshire, which I will talk about in a little bit. So that gives him a small amount of tax break on the barn itself. The Preservation Alliance usually does a barn tour every other year. And the year we did do a barn tour in his town one year, so he opened his barn for the tour. But he's just so proud of his barn and all the work he's done. And he's actually had 2 family weddings in that barn as well, one this past summer. So the assessment really gave him the information he needed to then move on to do the work on his barn. The barn in the top right-hand photo was purchased by a young couple. They loved the barn. They had an assessment done. The assessment actually told them the best way to rehabilitate this barn would probably be to take it all down, repair the pieces, and put it back up again. But they felt like they couldn't afford that, so they talked to a couple other contractors, actually found a contractor that was willing to do it a little bit at a time without taking it down. So they have been doing that, and they're really pleased with the work and so thrilled that they've put money into the barn. And then the one on the bottom is this massive barn in the North Country of New Hampshire. And the gentleman actually purchased it for his daughter's farm operation. And when he purchased it, the roof was having some issues, not major issues. But he did have an assessment done, and the assessment did say there was still some life left in the metal roof. So he went ahead and had it repainted to give it a little more waterproofing, and was just thrilled with the outcome. The barn's doing really well. It still needs a little bit of work, but it's not going to fall down. And he was so excited about the barn assessment and actually in the grant program that he gave us the money back and said, please pay it forward to help support other barn owners. So really 3 really great success stories after having barn assessments. Next. This is another great barn, a local landmark up in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. Really great story. This was the Sugar Hill Sampler, which was a fabulous store with all kinds of country crafts and local products sold for years and years, right in the center of their very small town on an open lot, so very visible. And the building or the business, the store went out of business, and the barn went on the market. There's no house associated with this lot, it's just the barn. And a neighbor who lived across the street was so concerned about the potential loss of this barn, that she purchased the barn. And then actually Ian went up and did a barn assessment and talked about what the barn needed. And this was an example of a bank barn that was shifting a little bit. And this photo on the right here with the barn up on cribbing, this is a new news story where just from August, where they're actually doing the foundation work to the barn. So a great success story. I don't know if you have anything to add, Ian, to that one.
No, because we're going to add to that as soon as we go to the next one, I think.
Okay.
All right, so this is the sugar. This is that barn. So it's a bank barn. I'm going to be quick about this and say for the nuts and bolts of this kind of stuff, really go visit the earlier talk I gave that has, you know, the link to that. So there's a bank barn and you can see the foundation moving. The frost has started moving that foundation. You can see it's leaning and the big swoop down the slope. So that's moving that barn down slope. And this is that particular barn that we just saw picked up. You can have the next one, Jeff. And basement. So there's actually that same barn as well. A basement posting. It's coming down onto insufficient footing stones. You can see the organic matter in that basement and that it was very wet in there. There'd been water running through that basement. And so all the posts in the basement were rotting. There's a great environment for powder post beetle. And so these are two of the real big problems that you'll find in bank barns. And the posting you can take care of fairly easily. The foundation issues are more difficult and usually if they're bad enough will result in the picking up of the barn to take care of, to rebuild or put in concrete and deal with the drainage issues around the uphill side of the barn. But that's the key, is dealing with those drainage issues. And you can't deal with those drainage issues if the barn is slightly just starting to move. And I talk about that in that linked show. So please visit that. And we can have the next one, Jeff. Okay, so this is what happens if you don't take care of those things. This is a bank barn, and I think it's the St. Bonnie's bank barn in New Hampshire here, and they had serious deterioration in the posting in the basement, which had given out, and so you can see where it has pulled apart. This was a queen post that pulled down, and when you get to this stage right here. This is where I'm talking about, where you're either going to pick up the barn or you're going to disassemble it to fix it, and this is where it sort of gets into the bigger kind of fix story when you have this kind of joinery failure up above in the barn. You have the next one, Jeff. Okay, here's an example of what farmers do to their barns sometimes. So this is that early ground level that we saw earlier, in the show. This is the ground level Yankee Barn, 1784. It was a beautifully built barn, very heavily timbered, probably the nicest barn I've ever seen as far as the structure goes. And it had a beautiful king post system in there that the farmer cut out when he put in a traveling hay fork. And the traveling hay fork was patented in 1862. So this was after that period of time. And this guy just went in there and cut all the king posts that went up from that top timber and moved them aside for his traveling hay fork. It's amazing what they would cut out and still stand underneath the structures while they were cutting them out. So these are the king posts reinstalled in that barn with the corresponding knee bracing. And you can just see the added strength they add to these barns. I mean, you could just about drop a truck on top of this barn and it wouldn't have a problem. We can have the next one, Jeff. Powder post beetles. Okay, it takes a large infiltration to cause problems. This is a pretty large powder post beetle in this problem in this barn. This is basement first floor framing, and this once again in a moist basement. I think this is actually that Sugar Hill barn as well. And so the moisture down there, so organic matter in your basement, it holds moisture. That's the environment the powder post beetle really loves. So you really got to get that organic matter out of the basement. And of course, that's where they shoveled all the manure. And when a farmer gets done working, or, they're not moving all that manure anymore. I mean, whenever we're storing a barn, we're always doing the farmer's last chore for him. So we always move the manure in the end. But spraying a product like Boracare, which is safe for pets and stuff like that, will really take care of powder post beetles. So I really recommend doing that, but really get rid of the organic matter. And don't store a lot of loose wood in your barns. Next one, Jeff. There's a ground level barn. And this is one of the problems with ground level barns is that especially if they're built out of smaller field stones, they start falling away. Where you see the stones still meeting the barns, that's where the load bearing points are underneath the posts. So they're holding the stones there. Otherwise, obviously that barn would be in serious problems. This is an easy thing to fix as long as the sills are in good shape. So you got to maintain your sills. We can have the next one, Jeff. overgrown vegetation. So here's something any homeowner can do. You don't want vegetation growing on the side of your barn. So you really want to get rid of that, so you don't have vegetation sitting on the side of the barn because it holds the moisture in there, traps it, and will get rid of rot your siding and your sills faster. Go ahead, Jeff. Okay, once again, we're back to that ground level barn, that really nice Yankee barn where they had taken out the king posts that we saw just earlier. So a lot of times, most of your ground level barns, your first floor is going to be in really bad shape. It's got to have had a powder post beetle in it, cows on it, or what have you. So there's a repair of that ground level barn, and it's timber framed. And we also rebuilt the stone foundation on it. You can see how nice he built this barn was. The important thing when you're rebuilding the first floor of a ground level barn, and you're going to do it on a dry laid stone foundation, is it really wants to be a timber framed first floor, because that what maintains the integrity of the frame and allows these barns to take abuse and stay standing even when things start moving. Next one, Jeff. Here's what not to do on the upper right of not to do on a bank barn. And it's what farmers did a lot. I mean, Jeff laughed at me last time I was chatting, but I said they should have never shown farmers the invention of concrete. Because they would pour concrete, that barn's already started migrating, that dry laid stone foundation has already started migrating, and that poured concrete against it to try and keep it from migrating. And that's a Band-Aid that doesn't work. The thing will keep migrating, and that concrete just becomes a issue that has to get taken out of there to actually affect the proper repair. Basically, drainage is the only thing that's going to solve that problem. Bottom left is the starting rebuilding of a dry laid stone foundation. And you can see in today's world, because we have big equipment, we're not just working with oxen, you can build that correctly. So that's massively built. It's and the bottom of the foundation is probably 8-9 feet wide with lots of backer stones and tie stones. When they first built these foundations, most of the time they were curtain walls, and that's why they suffered with larger problems when the frost started moving them. Even without drainage installed in this one, this barn wasn't going to move. But you always want to install drainage. Next one, Jeff. This is actually the finished product of that rebuild of that stone foundation. And that's what a stone foundation should look like when it's in good shape. It's slightly battered, so it's not plumb, and it's built monolithically, like I said, with a lot of tie stones and backer stones going back into the side hill. This is where you can see a new first floor going in. I want you to see in that new posting in the basement that you can see there on the right is the size of the posts, and also the fact that you can see that there's a moisture barrier on the bottom of those posts, because the end grain, you don't want wicking up moisture. So that keeps that from happening. I mean, the goal is to try and limit your costs down the road. So we use some modern technology to get to that point so you don't have to revisit the same problems again and again. Next one, Jeff. So this is that same barn actually, and the reason this slide is in here is I want to highlight the importance of the right way to restore timbers. Okay, most of the time you're going to see in a lot of old barns where they've had rotten bottom posts where it's just a lap joint, a straight lap joint, and that doesn't maintain the integrity of that post. So you can see the lap joints in these posts here and the bottom timber, and they're locking lap joints. You can see the angle cut in them. And so that makes them very hard for them to move and makes them an integral part of that timber. And you also want the lap joint to fall either on the timber or right on a knee brace to transfer the load down. Next one, Jeff. Okay, here's a common problem of whether it's a bank barn or a ground level barn. At the doorways, specifically if it's an inside opening door, which is that bottom left-hand picture, the sill was always exposed to the weather. So the sill rots. And in the upper left, you can see where the farmer, once again, with that great invention of concrete, has poured concrete at that entranceway. And usually what that does is that this rotten sill is somewhere under that concrete, or it's been removed, but that concrete's poured and it's encapsulating the end of the joists and they continue to rot. So you're always going to have this problem in most barns today. And you also, there's going to be some rot in the bottom of the queen posts on either side of the entranceway. So what I look to do is that right-hand picture is to step back the sill in that doorway so that we don't revisit that problem. Next picture, Jeff. Oh.
Okay, this
Yep.
is me. As
And
I had
just a heads
mentioned
up,
earlier about the
oops.
barn
Oh,
tax.
Jeff, go ahead, Jeff. What?
Sorry, just a heads up, we got about 4 minutes left for presentation time, so.
Oh dear, real quickly, Barn Tax Incentive Program. This is a program that was set up by the New Hampshire Statewide Barn Committee, established in 2003 to encourage the preservation of New Hampshire barns. We now have 100 municipalities participating in the program with over 607 agricultural structures. So it's not just barns, but all types of farm agricultural outbuildings. Great, very successful program. I encourage Massachusetts to try to implement one. Barn preservation awareness. Now this is just, I always try to, the more we tell people about barn preservation and advocate for it, the better off our barns are going to be. And this is a collection of different photos. Bottom right is a beautiful barn in Samberton, New Hampshire. That was on our barn, one of the barn tours we had. And it just represents an iconic barn in town. And there were over 100 people at that particular barn tour. And it just gets people excited about preserving their local, even helping out neighbors with preserving their local barns. The top left photo is the Goss Farm, and over by the seacoast. Ian actually did the Ian didn't do the assessment on this. Ian did the work on this, but this is one of the few remaining coastal barns. It's within sight of the ocean. And the family lost the house to a fire, but the barn existed. And they really didn't want it to go away. So they actually sold it to the town. The town embraced it as a community barn. It's now being used for community programming, and there's a community garden there and all kinds of wonderful things. And they did put some money into doing some rehab work. The center photo is a picture of the head of the Heritage Commission in this particular town with the barn owner. This woman lived there for 60 years. Has been an amazing advocate and steward of her barn. But the Heritage Commission in town was always there by her side, encouraging her. And the photo on the right is the Heritage Commission's holiday tree with pictures of barns. And each Heritage Commission member would adopt an ornament, so adopt a barn and encourage that particular barn owner to get into the Historic Barn Tax Incentive Program. So great awareness through all different avenues. Next. Okay, and then these are just some real quick rehabilitation and reuse photos. This is all the same barn. This gentleman down in the bottom left photo came to the Alliance. We did an assessment. Ian did the assessment on his barn. The gentleman actually did all the work himself and uses this barn to house his cows, but also he's had multiple family reunion or multiple family parties. This one was a big family reunion to celebrate when he finished the barn. So really great story. Next. And here's another great new use. This is a Prescott Farm Environmental Education Center in Laconia. They too got a barn assessment and followed through with the work. Ian did the work on this one, and some of the previous photos you saw were of this barn. And they're now using it for program space for their kids' camp and other, I guess they just had a fundraising event in this barn. So really excited about their new rehabilitated barn. Next.
Okay, this is a reuse. I'm just going really quick on this one. So in converting barns to 4-season use, and you're going to heat that barn, you're going to celebrate the frame. So you're going to put something on the outside of that frame. I just want to say quickly that, usually what you do is you build a frame on the outside of your hand, you hang SIPs, Streskin panels on it. There are issues involved in that. I would say visit my sites, the earlier show, and you'll get some answers to that. But we'll go to questions, Jeff.
We can just zip through these last photos.
Sorry.
Public libraries, a great reuse. These are 2 different libraries in New Hampshire that were saved from demolition, moved, and then rehabilitated into libraries. Next. And historical society, all types of museums, historical societies love to embrace local barns. This one actually was moved to a new town, and what a great place to display all their farm implements. Next. And this was a private barn owner who has come to a lot of our barn workshops. He loves his barn, so excited to use it for his tree farm. And if you look closely, you'll see he also has solar panels on his south-facing slope of his barn. Next. And this one I love. This massive barn is owned by a condo association. There's a big historic house next to it that was converted to condos. They love their barn. They have embraced it wholeheartedly, take really good care of it. And there are individual storage units for each condo owner in the barn.
I just want to say one thing quickly when I look at these pictures, and this is just to accent the importance of barns. Imagine this landscape without this barn, right? So when you talk about anything in Massachusetts or New England, foliage season, which we're coming up to, it wouldn't be the same thing without seeing these historic structures out there. It's just colored leaves without seeing these barns. So I'm a little, it's obviously close to my heart, but I put a blinder on your eye and imagine not seeing those barns out there.
Okay, and real quick, always get funding issue questions. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of grant funding in New Hampshire, and I'm not so sure about Massachusetts either. Vermont
Even
is
less.
lucky to have a small matching grant program. But again, I just stress the barn assessments, because quite often people think that they have to pay, you know, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to rehabilitate their barn. But when they get these assessments, maybe it's not so bad, or you can phase it over a period of years. So do the barn assessment before you panic.
Yeah, but I think the important thing to point out here is that Vermont recognizes the importance of the barns to their economics, to the health of the state. You know, so that they see they give grants to private barn owners based on the barn and the viewscape and how it impacts agriculture in the community. And we can change those things in the other states by talking to our legislatures. So do that.
Thank you, Ian. So, okay, Jeff, I don't know, Jeff, if you wanted to say two things about Massachusetts funding.
Sure. So we actually have a Preservation Mass, a little resource sheet that I've added a link to near the original session information for the presentation that kind of goes through the potential sources of funding here in Massachusetts. And if there are a few in New Hampshire and Vermont, there are even fewer in Massachusetts. So it's very frustrating. And one of the many questions that my colleague Station and I get from barn owners is, how can I help find the money to do what needs to be done? And we often aren't able to suggest too many things, but we've listed everything there that we have and that we know about, and there are links that you can investigate for more information about those sources.
Great, thank you. And then I just put this book slide up here because there are fabulous books out there that are available. We also have added a book list to the conference website, but I encourage you to look through some of these books. Two of my favorite are Preserving Old Barns, written by John Porter from New Hampshire. Great resource with history of barns, reuse options, stabilization, best practices, repair. So really good. And this is a second edition that just came out in 2019. And then also the Field Guide to New England Barns and Farm Buildings by Tom Visser is one of my favorite guidebooks to really help with styles and dating your barn and different features and things like that. And also, I encourage you to, again, look at Ian's YouTube link that's on the website. So let's go to questions.
Okay. You know, I think what the wealth of knowledge that you both have, and while I'm fiddling around here with the question and answer panel, it just proves why it's important to bring someone to your barn who knows what they're looking at and knows, you know, can advise you. I mean, I feel like you both read the barns. You know, you look at their form, you look at where the windows are. It's just, you know, you look at the hewn versus sawn lumber. There are just so many clues there that just by observing, once you know what you're looking for, you can learn a lot and figure out the best way forward for working on your barn. So, so a couple of questions here. First one from Jill: how well are barn contractors connected with other contractors across the nation? We have lots of barns in Nebraska that are slowly falling apart, but we are having trouble finding contractors and people willing to work on them. I think that that's, you know, similar issue here in Massachusetts and in the Northeast as well. Not everybody is kind of qualified to deal with these structures. And Ian, you're a part of that network. What is your network of barn contractors like locally and around the country?
Yeah, mostly just in the New England area, because but it accents the problem that you're talking about because there are so few of us, so we all know each other, you know. But the problem is finding a contractor, to be honest, who can read the whole barn, you know, like you just said, to understand what's happening up above in relation to the foundation down below and coming up with a good recipe plan. I would say if Nebraska has a historical, I mean, that's the importance of the organization of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, is to head people in the right direction, you know, where they can find those answers. And to be honest, all barns tend to have similar problems, and you can do a lot of it online, to be honest, because the answers are there.
Well, and a sort of related question to that is the talking about common problems of historic stables versus barns. I mean, many are timber framed as well. There are different uses, obviously, and different scales. But as you say, Ian, it's an outbuilding like that. You know, generally there are common kinds of problems. Yeah. Roof, foundation, all the things that you talked about that are common to the different kinds of barns and stables.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I might add, you know, even local preservation organizations, you know, people can call to see if they have their own lists, if they can't find anything online or something, or just, you know, talk with your neighbors, talk with anybody who has a barn. I mean, and then try to develop this list. If one doesn't exist, try to develop it, because I'm always trying to redevelop or add to our list, because unfortunately we have some barn contractors that'll be retiring soon. So I'm always looking for the next generation. And unfortunately, there aren't quite as many in the next generation, but we encourage the older generation to teach the younger guys, but constantly adding to the network list.
Right, but the other thing is it's important to educate yourself so that you know how to talk to your contractor. So you watch that YouTube link that you see that I have on there. You get those books and look at them so that you can sort of direct to a certain extent, because you can educate yourself and say, oh, this is what needs to be done. You know.
Another question we have is, what other types of farm structures use the tax incentive program? I imagine that you know, any outbuilding, any farm building,
right? Any agricultural building. There's actually a list on our website, nhpreservation.org. We have a packet of information about it, and there is a whole long list. But it's, you know, silos and corn cribs and just the name. It just goes on and on and on. Chicken coops. So any agricultural building, really.
And Bev, could you give your website address again, nhpreservation.org?
Yes.
Just because folks, they have a really well-developed bunch of resources on their website that I encourage you to check out. And also, I really do encourage you to look at the YouTube video of the longer session that covers a lot of the same material that Ian and Beverly did earlier this year, that goes on for about an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and a half. So it goes into a lot of the things that they had to kind of boil down to do quickly here with a limited time into much more detail. So I really encourage you. It's worth, I watched it yesterday and I learned a lot just by having their banter and their going back and forth is also great too. So if that's it, any closing remarks, Beverly?
I just want to thank you very much for having us. It was really great to be here. Oh, well, and I'm willing to talk to anybody, you know, call me if you want. If Jeff can't answer your question, I'd be happy to try myself.
Same here. It's a pleasure. But also I encourage people, once again, go out in the landscape and say, hey, what if that building wasn't there? And think about that. So think about the importance of it. It's who we are.
And also give kudos to those who are working on their barns and preserving their barns.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. So we really appreciate you being here virtually all the way from New Hampshire. And thank you everybody who was able to attend the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Take care.